Hello, I am Hernan Barcana, a professor of astrophysics. We live at a time when societies that are largely secular seem to be in crisis over false beliefs. Some people have suggested that a return to traditional religion is the solution. I want to bring a different perspective to discussions and debates on atheism versus religion. Discussions of this issue are often philosophical and miss much of the attitude of science, especially as represented by physics, the field of science that is most fundamental and most quantitatively precise. I will begin with the following topics. What does it mean to really know something? What does it mean to explain something? And how can we understand free will and consciousness? Let's begin with what it means to know something, to obtain meaningful, reliable knowledge. Different fields have different standards for this. Science has very high standards. Let me give two examples. The first example is rather trivial, but makes the point clear. Suppose someone would like to travel from Rome to Washington. Regardless of whether this person is religious or not, he will choose to get on an airplane and risk his life on the knowledge that the plane is based on. This knowledge consists of physics plus practical physics, which is also known as engineering. This form of knowledge is so trustworthy that people routinely bet their lives on it. The second example is understanding the origin of life on Earth. Biologists understand how life evolved from the simplest living organisms, microbes that existed on Earth almost 4 billion years ago, to current life forms including human beings. However, scientists do not yet know how life began. There are theories about how it could have begun, but nothing has been well established. Given how hard it is for historians to agree on what happened even recently, it's not so surprising that it's hard to reconstruct what happened on Earth 40 million centuries ago. But a religious person will say, you see, science doesn't know how life started on Earth, and I do. God created life. Now let's compare the scientific answer and the religious one. What would it mean for scientists to consider that they had completely solved the question of how life arises? The judge of scientific knowledge is the ability to make predictions without knowing the answer in advance. So, for example, astronomers are successfully detecting thousands of planets around other stars in our galaxy. As technology advances, it will become increasingly possible to characterize the conditions on those planets. Suppose at some point we will find 100 planets with conditions that are pretty similar to those on Earth. A scientific understanding of the origin of life would allow us to predict what fraction of those planets has life on it. Does the statement, God created life, make a prediction as to how many of the 100 planets hold life forms? No. The standards within science for what constitutes knowledge are just much, much higher. To me, this issue of high standards of knowledge is also a major problem with philosophy. Consider the following age-old question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Philosophers and theologians can spend endless hours debating this question, but as a physicist, I'm not impressed. I would submit that this question is not meaningful. What do you mean by something? What do you mean by nothing? And most importantly, what do you mean by why? These are all words that are vague and cannot be defined precisely. To me, philosophical discussions of such a question consist of word salad. The intuitive feeling that such questions are profoundly meaningful is simply wrong. I'd much rather spend my time trying to answer scientific questions which are well defined and lead to reliable knowledge, the kind that helps build airplanes. I'd like to expand on the meaning of why. Physics gives a very different perspective from what people usually mean by the word why. For example, if you asked me why I recorded this video, I would answer that I wanted to contribute to the public discussion. There are no such wants or desires in physics. For example, you might ask why the Earth rotates around the Sun. According to Newton, it's because every pair of massive objects gravitationally attract each other, and this is a particular instance of that. According to Einstein, it's because the Sun's mass changes the geometry of space and time around it, and the Earth tries to travel on a straight line, but within that distorted geometry, the trajectory becomes an elliptical orbit. Now, these explanations are not very satisfying to the average person. None of them really answer why, They maybe answer how. What they really do is change the perspective by noting that the phenomenon in question is part of a much more general set of laws. This is what an explanation is within physics. The normal meaning of why only makes sense in our human world of independent agents with free will, or if you believe in a supernatural God with free will. Within physics, why is not the right question. This brings us to free will and consciousness, which are key elements of the discussion for a number of reasons. In debates of atheists versus religious people, I think that both sides often make a basic error on free will and consciousness. Many people don't understand that the microscopic world of atoms following the laws of physics can be very different from our macroscopic world at the level of human experience. So people assume that either both levels must feature free will and consciousness, or both do not. Religious people then say, since we have free will and consciousness, and physicists say that atoms do not, this implies that there must be something supernatural about us. Therefore, they say, this is basically a proof of God. Many atheists make the same error in the other direction, reasoning as follows. Since atoms don't have free will, neither do we, and thus, for example, criminals and terrorists are not responsible for their actions. I've made a separate video on free will, which you can watch, so I won't repeat everything here. I'll just summarize. Our perception consists of very limited knowledge, removed from atoms by a long hierarchy of scales. Even though the atomic level in principle explains those above it, fundamental properties at one level can be very different from those at another without inserting anything supernatural. Within physics, we have a number of good examples of this that are well understood. One example is temperature. A single atom doesn't have a temperature. This concept refers to an average property of a large collection of atoms. A more profound example is the direction of time. Consider two videos. The first shows an egg shattering on the wall, and the second reverses the direction of time, showing a shattered egg hitting the wall and coming together to form a complete egg. Everyone will immediately recognize that only the first video is possible in the real world, where time moves forward. It turns out that this directionality doesn't exist at the atomic level. If you were to follow just a single atom within the egg, you could not recognize which video was the one moving forward in time. And physicists understand how this deep feature of life, the directionality of time, arises in our macroscopic world. It's a similar idea with free will and consciousness. These are patterns within the human brain, which is a complex neural network that interacts with itself and the environment and is organized hierarchically with only limited knowledge present at the conscious level at the top of the hierarchy. Free will doesn't exist at the atomic level in the microscopic laws of physics, but we do effectively have free will as human beings. Understanding this separation of levels is a key element of accepting yourself as natural rather than supernatural. As another way of thinking about it, consider the analogy to computers. For example, computer chess programs have been able to defeat the human world chess champion now for almost 30 years. The way this breakthrough was achieved was basically by computers becoming so fast that they are able to consider an incredibly large number of possible chess moves and directly check if they lead to favorable positions. Well, that's one way to understand it. Another way to look at it is that computer chess programs perform a huge number of operations on binary numbers. This is what digital computer circuits actually do. So this second way of looking at it is more fundamental, but it's not useful. It doesn't actually tell you anything about how chess programs work. Does a computer chess program have free will? Well, you can reproduce a chess program's move if you run the same software with the same input chess position on a different computer. This doesn't change the fact that the program is choosing the best available move within its ability to judge. It doesn't change the fact that the program can be improved so that it will make a better choice in the future. In terms of free will, a human being is a much more complex version of a computer chess program. At each moment, your brain evaluates many possible moves or actions and chooses one according to very complicated internal considerations. The brain software can improve itself through internal deliberations, something that traditionally was not a feature of computer programs, but is a basic element of artificial intelligence, or AI. And the brain's evaluation responds to external stimuli, such as whether society treats crime as mainly punishable or mainly excusable. You do determine your own actions because you are a program running in your brain. What about consciousness? Various people, including some scientists and atheists, treat consciousness as a unique, fundamental phenomenon in nature that cannot be explained by physics. In my view, this mystical approach is quite similar to the religious notion of a soul. It is also reminiscent of the pre-scientific notion of life having a special vital force. Some people go further and claim that we can discover deep truth by observing our own consciousness with methods such as meditation and psychedelic drugs. We may indeed discover things about consciousness, but the idea that this can lead to more fundamental truth than physics, to me, is an unscientific type of mysticism which puts subjectivity above objectivity and is thus quite close to postmodernism. In fact, consciousness is not as clearly defined as it might seem, and it's not binary, as in either you have it or you don't. For example, no one would claim that a fertilized human egg is conscious. So, at what precise stage of fetal development does consciousness appear? Fetal growth is gradual. And how about animals? Is a chimp conscious? A dog, a fish, and so on down to a bacterium? Again, everything changes quite gradually, and there is no clear line for identifying consciousness, either in the complex tree of life today, or in the history of the evolution of life on Earth. And this is also consistent with personal experience. If you've ever fainted, or even just fallen asleep, you know that losing consciousness happens gradually. Looking into the future, consider artificial intelligence. Someday there will be an artificial brain that is every bit as complex as a human brain and with similar structure. This, by the way, will probably not happen anytime soon because of our limited understanding of the brain. But when it is eventually achieved, this AI brain, even if built on electronic circuits, will act like a person. Assuming that it has some way to talk, it will claim to be conscious and to have free will, and I think it actually will in the same sense as us. Of course, we have to be careful because many AI systems are specifically designed to learn to imitate human abilities, including speech, and imitation can be a much more limited task than generating the original. That's the end of part 1 of my perspective on atheism versus religion. See part 2 for additional topics such as: why were many famous scientists religious? Can science be reliable even though it is constantly changing? Can society handle atheism? And what does science say about our place in the cosmos?